introduce you to Heather Grady, who authored a very informative paper in Philanthropy as an Emerging Contributor to Development Cooperation. Heather?
Yes. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, very well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to Wings for inviting me to speak today. And I could say as well, if anyone has difficulty hearing me or would like a copy of my remarks, I'm very happy to provide them afterwards. Unfortunately, I don't have any nice PowerPoint that like Karolina did, but I hope it's useful anyway. I don't know how many participants today have read or skimmed my paper, and I realize it's very long at 30 pages. But I've had very good responses to it, in part because I think there's a gap in analytical work on global philanthropy that actually tries to weave together not only philanthropy that originates in different countries and regions, but also links the important contribution that philanthropy can play in contributing to development outcomes. I had a reader in China, for example, say that it brought some ideas together that she hadn't yet thought of and thought was very relevant. I was eager to write this paper because I've been involved in international development cooperation for many years, and only more recently in philanthropy, and I think the two domains face a huge gap in understanding. And the emphasis of the Istanbul meeting, for which this paper was commissioned by UNDP, that South-South cooperation, led me to incorporate that dimension in the paper rather than just North-South flows, and I think that's also particularly important to analyze and discuss. So let me start with a set of 8 major points that I made in the paper, and then I'll end with some of the highlights of the recommendation. The first point is the following. While more stakeholders are being brought into the international development processes, and we have to remember that the UN thinks of the real actors here as member states and the rest of us as non-state actors, civil society and the business sector are increasingly involved. But philanthropy is still standing apart, despite its scale, its ambition, and the potential of its contribution. And as Karolina pointed out, in a recent year when OECD DAC donors, that's Development Assistance Committee, gave official development assistance of about $130 billion, philanthropic flows in the same year from just those donors was almost $60 billion. So we're talking about almost half. Second point, despite that, philanthropy definitely should not be viewed mainly as a gap filler for ODA, for official development assistance. Really, it's crucial that philanthropy is seen as bringing a complementary and beneficial set of new actors, approaches, and types of funding. Philanthropy is generally much smaller, less bureaucratic, and more nimble, better suited to experimenting, innovating, and piloting. And at its best, philanthropy can be path-breaking. Of course, we support innovation and field building and sometimes what we call first movers. Also, obviously, because it goes beyond government's political cycles and the short-term interests of business, it can also be so-called patient capital, tackling long-term challenges and providing long-term investments at the community level. Now, that's probably obvious to everyone who's on this call, but I am absolutely convinced that we have to create a new narrative about philanthropy's role in society, particularly in the global South, because there is suspicion for many governments around the world, and to some extent the sector is coming under greater threat. And this narrative has to be about what stimulates human motivations at their most basic, the willingness to give and help others voluntarily, to support collective and individual human initiative and ingenuity, and an expression of the belief that the answers to our toughest challenges is not just in the state or the market, but it's in a broader array of individuals and institutions. I think really pointing out the value in supporting organizations who represent different beliefs and perspectives and approach the same problems with different solutions is a very important point to make. And this is so true of the post-2015 agenda that Karolina was just talking about. A third and related point is that philanthropy has to have the space, the laws and policies to support a vibrant civil society. And as you well know, that space is shrinking and we have to address it as strongly as we can. A fourth point is I make a case in the paper about the importance of moving more foundations from being operating foundations to providing grants to others. Why is this important? In my view, a foundation that simply runs its own programs is effectively an NGO with an endowment. I think one aspect that philanthropy has that NGOs don't is that they can support portfolios of grantees, even with modest resources, to try different approaches toward reaching the same goal. And a portfolio enables one institution simultaneously and over time to test and support disparate organizations and interventions. This really helps with creating networks, partnerships, and discourse on critical issues. And this is an essential contribution to the post-2015 agenda. A fifth point is that philanthropy's contribution should be better measured, and there's a need for a stronger emphasis on better data overall in terms of both measuring progress and enabling a better understanding of the range of potential grantees that can work on development themes. I think this will help to build trust, and documenting and communicating positive change and coordinating that more often toward agreed international development goals will be really useful. And this is, again, relevant as we move toward adoption and implementation of the post-2015 agenda next year. I realize there's an obsession amongst some foundations with measurement and metrics and quantifiable short-term results. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm simply talking about documenting better what people are doing. A sixth point is that the differences in the norms and practices of the ODA and philanthropy sectors that are described in detail in the paper have to be addressed. And this really comes down to three things: how strategy is formulated, how success is measured, and the drivers of accountability and transparency. If the differences are acknowledged and embraced, then I think we'll see the benefits of complementarity. But if they're ignored, they'll constrain effective collaboration. Again, I think a lot of people in official development sector don't really understand what philanthropy is all about. And I think progress on this has to come through networked approaches and support institutions like WINGS that serve as hubs for building capacity and sharing information, because it takes too much time if it's done one by one. The seventh point I emphasize is the far greater role that community foundations could play in development cooperation as strategic partners, who themselves build community assets, trust, and local solutions. And an eighth and final point before the recommendations is that while South-South official development cooperation and financial flows are growing very rapidly, South-South philanthropic flows are growing very slowly. And I think that's because of pressure for philanthropists to fund locally, because people give when they have personal connections, and because the marketplace between the giver and receiver across national boundaries isn't yet working well, mostly because of information issues, I think. So just to end on the recommendations, I divided them by sector. So two key recommendations for the multilateral system that were in the paper: to create entry points and routinely invite philanthropy, North and South, to be a part of the post-2015 agenda and other national and global planning and implementation efforts, thinking about community foundations as key development partners in that, and building this around active collaboration, not just occasional speaking roles. And Karolina very well described our post-2015 partnership platform for philanthropy that's an attempt to do that. The second point for the multilateral system is consider that outreach and coordination around specific development goals and targets is much more helpful to philanthropy than one general partnerships goal, as we had in the MDGs, MDG 8. There are 17 goals and 127 targets. I would be surprised if anyone can't find something of interest in there. Second is recommendations on the role of governments. Again, just a few of them. First, given that philanthropy and civil society will be even more important in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals than the MDGs, to actively create an enabling environment for both domestic and international philanthropy. And this, again, is about legislation and policies and practices, simple registration and reporting processes, and enabling international philanthropy to support domestically. And the second one is that government departments responsible for development cooperation should become more familiar with domestic and international philanthropy and suggest partnerships. And the third is just to ensure that data that government collects on philanthropy is easily accessible to others outside the government and counted as part of tracking toward development goals. And finally, in my last minute, just to say 3 recommendations for the philanthropy sector itself: to become better informed about the post-2015 agenda and other national development goals and targets, and to try to begin to at least report toward them a bit more and understand that external context and possibly contribute more intentionally to them. Second, to use networks or affinity groups to create shared processes and partnerships with the UN and interested governments, and make sure that we have speakers who understand that sector at our events. And finally, philanthropy in the Global South, again, using the opportunity of the post-2015 agenda to expand the proportion of its giving that's grant-making to other institutions, because this will create a stronger civil society sector that makes a lasting contribution to the goals. So thank you very much. I hope my input was useful.
Thank you very much, Heather. It was very, very useful. And we could hear you very well, loud and clear. But it would be great if you could share your notes so we can share with the other participants. And it was very interesting that you mentioned networks, and Naila Farouky from the Arab Foundations Forum will be able to talk a little bit more about that. Naila?
Hello?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Oh, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. Sorry, my mic is having a little bit of a glitch.
Oh, not a problem.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to those of you who are in the other hemisphere. So actually, Anna, my name is Naila Farouky. You keep saying Farouky, and I just want you to say the Y at the end of my name.
Thank you for that.
Anyway, so thank you very much for inviting me to speak on this. I really just want to give a little bit of context regarding the role of the Arab region on this, and then also just the position of the Arab region. Can we go to the next slide? Sorry, I don't know how to move the slide. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so I did a very quick kind of SWOT analysis regarding the region that we represent. So when we talk about the Arab region, we're looking at 22 countries that make up the region. And I think a lot of times one of the issues that we face as a region is that we get lumped into one big kind of stereotypical image of what that region represents. And in fact, it is it's a rather diverse region of countries with very different cultural aspects, very different socioeconomic aspects that are not always taken into account. And I don't do a very good job of actually taking them individually in this presentation. But I am coming from a place where I'm kind of representing the region as a whole, and there are a lot of strengths and our weaknesses and the opportunities and the threats that we face regionally that are relatively common that we share amongst each other. So I'm just going to sort of give you a little bit of that context, and then I'll go into a list of some recommendations based on what we were discussing here with regard to the Millennium Development Goals, and then subsequently the Sustainability Development Goals. So the strengths that we share is, one thing, obviously the geographical size of the region, which basically poises the 22 countries to have a relatively substantive impact and influence on the sector and beyond the sector. The region is really emerging as a strong contender and a creator of innovation and entrepreneurship across several different sectors, including philanthropy, including finance, including social development, community development. We have resources that are abundant and quite readily available, which include the brain power across the region, which include the money to allocate towards international development. But some of the weaknesses that we face, and I think we face them in the sector, in the philanthropic sector specifically, but really in many cases we face it across other sectors as well, which is we tend to have a relatively ill-defined strategy and not a very clear vision for how the sector can best serve itself and how we can maximize the potential of philanthropy's regional goal and its global role. One of the things that I think both Karolina and Heather mentioned is the lack of the commonality with regards to language across the sector on a global scale. So when we talk, we go to all these conferences, we throw a lot of acronyms around, and half the time, if you're not, quote unquote, in the loop or weren't part of the working group that created a certain set of documents that refer to, to different issues that are being faced, you don't necessarily know exactly what we're referring to. I mean, I know, for instance, in my case, with, the terminology around global south, 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 global north, whatever, that was a little bit confusing for me at first, and I think we sort of need to address the fact that across the board, across different, like literally different languages, and then different regions. We don't all necessarily share the same language, but also not necessarily share the same understanding of the definitions that make up the different terminologies that we use. So, that is one of the weaknesses that we identify. Another thing with regard to the Arab region specifically is that we tend to have an absence of an enabling environment vis-a-vis the government's role and regional policies that allow for a national and cross-border collaboration within the sector. I mean, I can pick off the top of my head several countries. Egypt is one that stands out with regard to an enabling environment for philanthropy, where in fact it's becoming less and less enabling and much more restrictive. And so that doesn't necessarily inspire a lot of confidence in the sector, and also doesn't inspire a lot of confidence globally in the sector within the region. So that impedes collaboration not only on a national level or within borders, but across borders. Another big thing that both Karolina and Heather mentioned is with regard to the egregious lack of data for the sector, for the region. When it comes to the philanthropic sector, one of the things that we're constantly talking about are what are the 5 W's of the sector: who is doing what, where are they doing it, when are they doing it, why are they doing it, who are they doing it with, who are they interested in doing it with, and we don't have enough data to support this information and to give us the information that we need in order to give us the insight to be able to build better strategies towards better giving. Another issue, again, which has been mentioned by the two speakers before me, is around the lack of uniform and standardized regional measures of accountability and transparency. And in the Arab region specifically, part of that issue is similar to the rest of the world. I mean, I think we hear it's a very trendy topic to discuss issues around transparency and accountability, and it's trendy because obviously it's a serious issue. But part of the problem with the Arab region is that the reasons for why we lack these measures are not necessarily the same reasons as they are in other places. There tends to be a suspicion around Arab philanthropy and its lack of transparency and accountability, and oftentimes it gets painted with the brush of shadiness, or a lack of willingness to be accountable, a lack of willingness to be transparent. If you look at any these days in particular, if you look at any requirements and criteria around funding for Arab philanthropy, you'll find several restrictions around making sure money is not being transferred to any terrorist organizations. Like there are a lot of obstacles that Arab philanthropy has to overcome in order to be able to prove its worthiness. But the real reason, I think, or at least one of the big reasons for why there is this lack of transparency and accountability is a lot of Arab philanthropy is directly related to religious giving. And part of the background around religious giving is that the more anonymous the giving, the more charitable it is, the more altruistic it actually is. So the reasons behind not necessarily being accountable and transparent is that that it's not always in the best interest of the giver, or at least from the perspective of the giver. That's not always in the best interest of the giver to be transparent, because then that sort of diminishes the value of that giving. One of the other weaknesses is that we, as a region, as a sector, have pretty much agreed that there is a huge disconnect between the understanding of what the grant makers are looking to fund and what the grant seekers are seeking funding for. And part of that, I think, is that there isn't enough communication across sectors. And I mean, globally, we're recognizing this trend that philanthropy isn't just restricted to the philanthropic sector itself. But when we break down the most basic definition of what is philanthropy, we look at it as the use of private funding towards public good. That really applies across the board. It's not just sector specific. So we know that the private sector is getting more and more attuned to, or at least more and more open to discussing how they can be more involved within the philanthropic sector or within philanthropic activities. So there needs to be, I think, one of the weaknesses that we face in the region specifically, and I from my understanding is that it's a global issue as well, is that there's not enough cross communication. Each of these different sectors are having the conversations individually, but they're not having them together. Which takes us to what are the opportunities that we are poised to sort of realize. the potential for the insight that this region can offer, and the kind of collective efforts that this region can offer to the sector at large is that geographically, obviously, we're talking about 22 countries with a lot of resources, with a lot of different access to different things that can be offered towards whether it's the data collection, whether it's just the money itself, whether it's innovation. The other thing is, given the size as well, there is strong potential for these partnerships to initiate advocacy for the sector on a regional and a global scale. There are opportunities for both quantitative and qualitative research that can raise the credibility of the region to fill a research gap in the sector. Part, I think, of what is interesting when looking at the opportunity for Arab philanthropy to commission its own research. First of all, it doesn't do that, and it doesn't do that on a consistent enough to be able to be a player in that realm. Important for Arab research is that because it is a unique sorry, I just got distracted. Because it's a unique area with unique issues and unique threats, it needs to have a more local input into the data that's being collected. And so I think that, we have this opportunity to do that. We haven't necessarily realized that the opportunity exists. The other thing is around the use of and the access to social media and different outreach opportunities that can help us expand the footprint of both the impact and awareness across the region and globally. Just the fact that sort of this realm of social media has kind of leveled the playing field. And another thing is, the creation of these strong opportunities for strategic partnerships, which serve but also extend beyond the sector towards creative initiatives, towards creative partnerships. And then the more immediate threats that we face in the region is that we have, a very serious lack of sustainable local funding plans for both institutional and sustainable development. We have difficulty in securing funding for long-term activities from regional donors versus foreign donors, foreign government donors or foreign private donors. And that's something that we really are trying to address very seriously in the region, which is to try to inspire more giving within the region for the region, and to inspire giving towards longer term, whether it's institutional development, covering core costs. It's almost impossible to find an Arab funder who will fund, 20, 30-year institutional development of philanthropic organizations. And then obviously the most obvious threat is this unstable geopolitical environment that we face across the region, particularly in the last 3 years. Okay, the next slide, Anna. So basically the recommendations, I really just listed them. They're just 5 very basic. They basically cover everything that we've just discussed, but, the recommendation to have a stronger networking plan and really a stronger networking strategy. Again, realizing that we're not all the same, even though this region shares a lot of similarities, but there are also a lot of differences. So to be able to build and nurture these networks within the sector and extra to the sector is really a key to the success of the future sustainability of the sector within the region and in establishing it as a player on the global scale. To raise awareness, increasing awareness of the goals for the sector at large, both regional and globally, via means of communication with clear and defined strategic goals. And again, this speaks to the issue of shared and common language. To create materials and outreach that communicate clear and defined strategic objectives to a sector-wide, regional, and global audience, but in a way that is also customizable to the local communities. And then obviously building a knowledge and resource base, which goes to the whole data issue. And then, to start to talk about building effective advocacy and to not shy away from these issues of advocacy, because I think, and again, taking them within a cultural context where if you are in certain countries within the region that don't necessarily have enabling environments, at least be creative about what you consider advocacy, but to not shy away from taking up, advocacy campaigns and positions. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Naila, for this great presentation on philanthropy in our region, the challenges and weaknesses, and also the opportunities we have. And I'll pass it on now to Helena Monteiro, that's Wing's Executive Director. Helena, can you hear me? Just a moment, because we can't hear you. Okay, I think you were on mute.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Is it good enough? Should I speak louder?
No, I think that's fine.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. That's very good. Well, thank you very much, Karolina, Naila, and Heather for the presentations. I would like to just share with the group some information about Wings. Most of you already know, but for the newcomers, we are, a global network of grantmaker associations and support organizations serving philanthropies. And we have over 100 organizations participating in our network in more than 50 countries spread in all regions of the world. And our mission is to strengthen, promote, and provide leadership on the development of philanthropy and social investment worldwide. Basically, in a nutshell, we represent as well the collective knowledge for philanthropy in a global scale, especially given the lack of data that both, that all of you before me mentioned, Naila, Heather, and Karolina. So that's basically our role. Wings has been involved in this discussion on how philanthropy can, work closely or closer to multilateral organizations and looking at supporting development goals. Since 2012, Karolina and I started working on this and bringing, those two worlds together to identify opportunities for collaboration and synergy. And since then, we have been taking a very consistent role in making progress on this dialogue. So we are following up on some of the recommendations that were mentioned here by Heather on her paper when she specifically mentioned, well, for philanthropy, one of the recommendations for philanthropy is to be better informed of development goals and processes at the UN and governmental multilateral levels. And this is one of the things that Wings is doing through this webinar, to publishing, information on our, blogs and newsletters, and and supporting our members to take more interest in this issue and to become more familiar, to be able to dialogue better with different partners and players in development goals. The other recommendation in terms of working in networks, that's also what we support. Of course, not all of our members have only or exclusive specific interest on philanthropy supporting development. There are other, thematic areas that we also support our members to engage, collaborate, and gain capacity and bring the discussion back to their own members. So one example of this is the work we're doing on transparency and accountability, where we are carrying out discussions on how to promote better mechanisms for accountability and transparency for philanthropy. And our members, the associations and support organizations, carry out several discussions that then they can bring back to their own networks to implement more, practical processes and tools. So that's another thing that we are doing. And we are also supporting the recommendations pointed out at Heather's paper and supporting, some of the weaknesses identified by Naila in the sense of the lack of data for the sector. So we are working a lot on promoting that philanthropy manages data and uses data in a better way to look ahead, to promote collaboration, to identify strategies and identify objectives and goals. And we very much welcome this discussion now with UNDP or with the UN system and governments on how they can make existing data more available for the philanthropy sector as well. So we need to look at the data of private resources being invested for the social good and on what they're investing and how much, but it's also good to access data on social development and on development goals that's already available. So we are taking an active role in that as well, and one of the things that we are working on now is on the promotion of the Global Data Charter, which is a platform that supports collaboration for different partners on the sector or different stakeholders regarding philanthropy. And through this document that was put together through a very comprehensive group of experts, we put, we clearly identify what's the vision, why do we need data for the sector in philanthropy, and what are the values that, guide this work with data, and the principles in terms of, quality and availability of data, and some guidelines and best practices on how people can collaborate for data. There is an increasing need for collaborative efforts to promote development, to tackle social challenges, and to reach to a more effective philanthropy. This Global Philanthropy Data Charter sets some principles for, best practices for collaboration on data and philanthropy. So we are following up several of those recommendations in an effort to engage our members, to raise awareness of our members of these issues, and also to support them to gain capacity to address those issues, with their own networks at the domestic and regional levels. And we also, with UNDP and part of this platform, we are working closely, saying a very clear message to how governments and how multilateral organizations can take an active role in supporting for a more enabling environment for philanthropy and civil society. This is a key issue as well. If we want to make effective contributions to development goals, we need a robust and civil society and effective mechanisms for grant making, for money to shift and to support the causes. So an enabling environment in terms of legal environment and fiscal environment for philanthropy and nonprofits, it's very much necessary, and that's a strong role that multilateral organizations can work along with governments to promote and to help the sector. So those are the main areas that we are promoting or working in supporting of this initiative. And in terms of what is next, we're having more consultations, we're producing more documents, and we believe that even though we're working in a parallel way or track with our work on accountability and transparency, I'm very sure that at one point this will contribute directly to support philanthropy getting more engaged in development goals as well. So stay tuned, and any of the members feel free to send specific questions, or if you need help identifying more documents, to get more information, to have a domestic discussion about this with your members and clients, feel free to approach us. I think there's much more to say, but I will wrap up here and send it back to Anna for the webinar.
Thank you very much, Helena. It's very interesting that Helena on the paper highlights the role of associations and support organizations and the work Wings has been doing towards several of the challenges pointed out both by Heather, Karolina, and Naila. We are opening up for questions, so you can send your questions through the chat box on the right-hand side, or you can unmute yourselves or just raise your hands here. Our first question is from Gwyneth Gall. It's for Heather. Heather emphasized the role of community foundations opposite to corporate or family foundations in supporting and development goals. So she'd like Heather to elaborate a bit more on how she sees this role of community philanthropy on development.
Yes, thank you. I think that many people are unfamiliar with with sort of the nature and the approaches of community foundations. Many people who work in international development cooperation are familiar with larger, sort of the better, longer established, northern-based foundations like, say, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, or newer ones like the Gates Foundation or the Moore Foundation. But the whole phenomenon of community foundations, which now number, I think, more than 1,500 or even 2,000 around the world, is not very well known. And even though it also started, my understanding is it started in the state of Ohio in the U.S. and has expanded around the world. The nature of those as institutions locally, where they can absorb international giving or giving from anywhere. They also mobilize local funds and resources. They have strong ties to the local community. They're generally governed by people from the local area. Examples that are well known, like the Kenya Community Development Foundation and so on. I just think they're great models for partnerships with international development cooperation. But frankly, they're just overlooked. They're not well understood. So now that there is a growing, a global fund and a global alliance of community foundations, I think that provides an opportunity for their profile and activities to be scaled up more. And so I think it could contribute across the development agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather. And we have another question from Laura. Maybe Naila could address it. That you mentioned several of the challenges that philanthropy faces. So could media or even social media have a role in bringing this kind of awareness on the potential role of philanthropy in general and philanthropy in development?
Sorry, you're asking if media can have a role in raising awareness?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously, absolutely. But I think it depends on what, I think it depends also on the understanding of media and whether we're talking about, user-generated media as in social media, or we're talking about official media having a better understanding, so in order to be able to better contextualize what philanthropy is to an audience that may not necessarily be part of the sector, but wants to be brought into the sector. So I think it's kind of a dual role that the sector plays in collaboration with the media, and not to just depend on the media to be able to adequately kind of contextualize the sector and the needs of the sector to a larger audience.
Yes, and thank you, Naila. A question for Karolina now, that you mentioned during your presentation, and that maybe we need some more punctual, some more specific partnerships instead of just having this general partnerships with philanthropic organizations. Could you expand a little bit more on that? And if there are already any initiatives that are more particular or concerned to any specific Millennium Development Goals, or if you're looking into that or into getting partners for that?
Thank you very much. Yes, the partnership and collaboration is certainly a key promise of the future development framework, but in general, development collaboration and tackling all the very complex challenges, be it as part of the international development framework or even outside. And philanthropy has already been participating in this global coalition, but certainly less in the sector than private sector and civil society foundations. And this is what we see here from the bird view of the UN. And however, there are already a number of great partnerships between foundations and multilaterals, not just multilaterals, but in general. Within the UN, for example, there are large foundations, American foundations, such as Gates Foundation, Hewlett Foundation, Harvard Foundation, mentioned too, which are already engaging with us directly or with specific UN agencies around specific partnerships and coalitions. Most of these coalitions, for example, this large foundation directly part of a global partnership which spans more than one country. So let's say Gates and Hewlett are working with the UN in a number of countries in Africa regarding health, education, maternal mortality, and so forth. Then there are obviously numerous cases of partnerships which are just implemented in one country. Most of them are in at the country level between the UN agency and specific one foundation or more. For example, I can bring up an example of a great partnership between UN family agencies in Turkey and Kabanki Foundation, which is working to raise awareness about women's rights and women's empowerment at the very local level, at the municipality level in eastern Turkey. And this is being done through something that is called gender-sensitive budgeting. But in general, we don't really even have information about these partnerships. And here at UNDP, we're trying to gather as much as possible data about specific collaborations at the country level, and also open up our country offices to invite foundations to various discussions, policy dialogue, so that the foundations know what's going on with the governmental, intergovernmental world. And when they see fit, they can also collaborate. So that's the big challenge that we have ahead of us over the next 2 years. And that's something that we'll be trying in doing.
Thank you very much, Karolina. That sounds very exciting. It's a huge task, a very interesting and exciting one. And we're coming to an end to our webinar, and I'll have to wrap it up. But I'd like to emphasize to the participants that you can always send any questions by email to Wings. You have my personal email at apinho@wingsweb.org. And you also have here our info@wingsweb.org. So if you have any questions, or if you think about anything else you'd like to know, please just do email me and I'll send your questions to the presenters. And I'd like to thank our presenters here today, and Heather, Karolina, Naila, and Helena. It was great that you took the time to teach us and show us a bit more about philanthropy, cooperation, and development. And do any of you have any final comments? Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, all of you. And I'd like to emphasize that the presentations, the PowerPoint presentations, and the YouTube recording, will be on our YouTube channel and Wings website. Thank you very much for your participation, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.